Is tax depreciation schedule actually worth it? In this podcast episode, we're speaking to the hecklers and breaking down the math behind capital gains tax when you sell a property and tax depreciation and what that looks like for you. And if you understand opportunity cost, why it's still super valuable for you. Hi, I'm Jaryd Krause. I'm the co-host of the Property Pals Australia podcast.
I'm the other co-host, Sam Powell, and in this episode we go pretty deep with Managing Director of MCG Quantity Surveyors, Mike Mortlock, about a pretty untalked about question in the property space, where depreciation and the effects of what that means for you as an investor, when you eventually come to sell your property. We also have a good laugh and a good riff about many different elements about the psychology of property investing, and Jaryd asked a really, really interesting question that I think a lot of people would get a lot of value out of. So, as always, this isn't the only way that we can help you for free. Jump on over to our website, propertypals.au/resources. There's a really great tool there to help you, increase your borrowing capacity. And that's really important to actually get into the investing game. And then you can take advantage of the tax depreciation that comes along with it.
Welcome to Property Pals, the podcast where we share everything around how to build a property portfolio, from researching areas, financing, structuring, buying, selling, and reinvesting to live a life of financial independence. As a disclaimer, any information shared by myself, Jaryd, Sam, and the Property Pals team is strictly general and should not be taken as constituting professional advice. You should consider seeking independent legal, financial, and taxation advice from a qualified professional.
Well, we've got Mike Mortlock back on the Property Pals Australia podcast, mate. Top 50 real estate influencers. How's that treating you as the managing director of MCG Quantity Surveyors these days? I'd love to.
You know what? That new list just came out, and I got dumped.
Oh, so, no way!
At best, I can maybe hope to be in the top 50 to 100, which they don't publish. But yeah, I think it's time for a year off. Hand over the gong. I mean, I think I was in about 44th position anyway, so it wasn't like I was that influential. But I don't know how all those things work. I think I probably wrote quite a few articles that Elite Agent published last year, and that's what got me up the list. But yeah, I've just had a year off, so not influential at all.
Oh well, mate, you still got the title of managing director, and that sort of gives you a bit of bit of power, I imagine, of the tax depreciation world.
Essentially gave that to myself. So again, you don't have to dig too far before this house of cards comes crumpling down. I am still on the board of Pippa, so that's probably my most fancy title. So maybe I'll lean into that.
Oh, well, maybe we'll pick that up a little bit later to see how the progression's going there, because it's good body to be a part of, mate. It's definitely needed in the industry. Jaryd and I talk a lot about, what actually makes a good buyer's agent, and there's good, there's bad, and there's rubbish in every industry. But
seemingly more so in yours, which is interesting. I think there are some big differences between, say, what I do and what you guys do. I mean, I have to finish a degree, have to be a member of the Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, have to be a registered tax agent. There's a lot more hoops. And I think that's a good thing when you're providing financial advice, or you have your finger on the button of, results that could be $10,000 to the detriment or positive of a client, or hundreds of thousands in your case. So, yeah, I mean, ideally there would be a little bit more regulation in place. And it's funny because the real estate industry itself is asking for more regulation. How often do you see an industry doing that?
Yeah, that's a good point, isn't it, Jaryd?
It's a great point. I would love to add to that and say that we should have, for buyers agents, another loop to jump through, and maybe they need to be a part of like 50 transactions under a buyer's agent training under a buyer's agent before they can go out on their own. I think that's it's like a driver's license, right? Like, like you need to do how many hours before you can go on the road by yourself and pass a test? Like, why don't we have that with people's financial livelihood?
We do in some states, but there's always ways to circumvent things, unfortunately, at the moment. But yeah, maybe that's a topic for another show.
Oh, nah, I'm all about free-flowing conversations, mate. Let's double down on this one.
All right, go for it.
What's Pippa doing in that regard? Like, obviously, there's we all know it's there. Property's been this. I don't know whether there's the wealthy people involved that don't want the other people, regulating property in a certain sense. But from the, I guess, ethical point of view, 100%, it needs more regulation, similar to, I guess the financial planning situation, the Royal Commission that went through back when I was with Westpac. I feel that maybe after the next cycle downturn, there'll be a lot of sort of commentary and a lot of pain out there, and that will bring more reform to this space. But what are you seeing as the big bad board member?
Well, I could see, and even pre me being involved in Pippa, I had some conversations with state reps of the Real Estate Buyers Agents Association, and I was hearing some maybe 5 or 6 years ago that there were a lot of members that were being asked to be expert witness in cases that went to court. Now, if it goes to court, then my understanding is that it is a public record, so it's available to kind of search exactly what happened. But I'm presuming that all of the cases that have gone to court involving buyers agents have settled because we don't have any of that information. And I've sort of said, look, this could be the sort of thing where we see a Royal Commission at some point in time because the numbers are just so big, right? But in terms of what Pippa is doing, I mean, we've been very busily advocating against some of these state-based legislation that's involved in, say, things like land tax in Queensland, which was ultimately repealed, things like rent caps that are being sort of put forward by the Greens, and all sorts of fanciful notions about what will actually fix the problem. Many of these things have just really exacerbated the problem. And I mean, look at vacancy rates. Has anything been fixed with this intervention? It's really mostly made it worse. But Pippa has the accredited advisor course as well. And of course, to be a member of Pippa, you need to be able to maintain your registration, your insurances. So there is a little bit more protection if you're using someone that's an accredited advisor through Pippa. But it's a difficult thing, and we're only one relatively small organisation. But for what we do, I think we punch above our weight.
You're fighting the good fight, mate. Let's
try to.
Try on that one. Well, I guess one of the key reasons now that's out of the way, we want to do. It is an interesting space, and I think it deserves a lot more time and airtime. And but for the purpose of today, Jaryd, we thought we'd get the mic on to, I guess, help people understand a little bit more about tax depreciation and the effects on when you sell your property. So, like, I guess my question to you to start off, Mike, is how does claiming depreciation on my investment property affect the amount of tax that I'll pay when I eventually sell it?
This question always comes up in a relatively negative kind of framework. So often, for example, I'll do a presentation and I'll speak to a bunch of investors or whoever they might be, and I'll talk about the advantages of tax depreciation, how it helps you with cash flow, how often it's the second biggest property deduction you can get after the interest component of your loan. And then there'll always kind of be someone who typically will heckle at me and sort of say, yeah, but why would you claim it when you have to give it all back? And I think that's probably a good starting point. The pervasive notion that whatever you claim, you have to give back. Firstly, it's false. And also we need to consider a few things like the time value of money to really understand. So, what is probably simple for people to understand is if you buy a property, let's say for $1 million and you own it for 5 years and you sell it for $2 million, you've made a $1 million capital gain, right? That's fairly easy to understand. We know also that there is the CGT exemption. So if you hold the asset for 12 months or more, it gets cut in half. So you're only taxed on that $500,000, and then it's taxed at your marginal rate. So if you're on the top tax bracket of, say, 45%, then you're only taxed on 45% of that 500. So it's not the whole capital gain because of that exemption. The way tax depreciation works is there's two main components of depreciation. One is the plant and equipment items, things like ovens, cooktops, carpets, blinds, and then there's the other bucket really, which is the construction component. So that would be the concrete slab, the timber frame, the gyprock, even cabinetry and tiling, the roof, all those sorts of things, fencing. So with capital gains tax and tax depreciation, we really only need to worry about the Division 43 stuff, the structural things. So if during that period in that case study, we had that $1 million property, we sold it for $2 million, but as we owned that, as we were holding that property, we claimed, let's say, $100,000 worth of Division 43 deductions on the building structure. I mean, that's a massive number that's probably too big. But what would actually happen
round
is
numbers for mass.
Round numbers is good. I'm a pretty simple guy. So what we actually do is we need to say, okay, well, we claimed $100,000 worth of Division 43 while we owned it. What actually happens is that the technical way to describe it is it reduces our cost base. So before depreciation, our cost base was essentially what we paid for it. We paid $1 million. Now, if we claimed $100,000, it reduces that cost base by the same amount. So it now means that instead of, in the eyes of the tax office, us buying it for $1 million, we bought it for $900,000. So now the capital gains is not the gap between $1 million and $2 million; it's the gap between $900,000 and $2 million. So we've got $1.1 million capital gain, and then we apply the exemption. So the 1.1 gets cut in half to $550, then it's almost cut in half again to your marginal rate, and then that's what you pay. So firstly, it's not everything you claim. The plant and equipment items will not normally trigger a CGT event. That's probably a topic of a whole nother show, because you kind of could sell assets in a contract with the secondhand value and make a real mess of it. But it falls into accountant's advice and not my area anyway. But it does sort of beg the question, okay, well, let's say maybe half of the deductions we claim we have to pay back. But it then needs to consider the time value of money. So would you like to have $1 today, or would you rather have $1 in 30 or 40 years' time? I mean, the answer is obvious today, right? Because we know with inflation, that dollar just isn't worth as much. So we're talking about not having to pay everything back. We're paying half of it back, and then it's our marginal tax rate. So it's nearly half of half, or 25%, as mathematicians might call it. So there's a time value of money. The other thing that I think people miss is, when is the hardest time to hold on to an investment property? In most cases, it's straight away, because over time, you may pay down your principal. Many investors just stick on interest only. So even if we chuck that in the bin, your rental should grow over time. So it's never going to be more arduous and more cash flow negative, or even if it's a cash flow positive, it won't be as strong straight away as it will be in time, because the rent will go up and your loan should stay the same. So I kind of say, look, based on the time value of money, based on the CGT exemptions, and based on the fact that cash flow is so important at the beginning of owning an investment property, and the worst situation we can get into as investors is being forced to sell because we can't maintain the cash flow of this asset. That's why I would argue that the question is a valid one, but it probably shouldn't be heckled as in like, oh, I got you, Mortlock. Like, I'm going to set this whole thing alight. You know, you and your spooky tax depreciation stuff, you've just got to give it all back. Hopefully I've explained how that's not actually technically true.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Like, it's like you said, it's half of half, half the amount. And then for the CGT, it's 50% of that anyway. So it's really 25% of the claimings. And typically it's not going to be $100K, like you said before, of depreciation costs. I'm definitely all about like having the money in your pocket, getting money back in your pocket firstly, because then you can just like put it in your offset account, or whatever it is, depending on how much it is, you can reinvest into something else. But yeah.
Is that the reason why you're not the top 50 influencers anymore, mate? Because people found out that they have to pay their start depreciation.
There's a current affair episode where they hide in the bushes outside my house about to air, I reckon.
60 Minutes is airing in September as well.
You're not a buyer's agent, mate. You don't have to worry about those reporters. No, but that's interesting. I guess not a loaded question in a way, but it's just to educate people, right? You do hear sort of they are horror stories, in my opinion, when people don't buy properties in the right location and they buy it for $500,000, and then 10 years later they've had no growth. It's a house and land package, so they've claimed a lot of depreciation. They sell for $500,000 and they get lumped with a bill essentially.
Well, in some respects, it's not my fault because I've said for a decade, established property outperforms. I've talked about what is the best property for depreciation deductions, and I think we shared that in the last show where I said buy a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex of 400 and make sure there's 18 gyms and 4 pools, and that'll be great for deductions, but it'll be a terrible investment, right?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to mention that one. That's episode 31, guys. That you should definitely check out how much quantity survey can actually save you on your property. So we went through multiple examples on that. And coming back to the depreciation and then having to pay capital gains tax, still it depends on what you end up doing with that money, right? Once you make the claim, the opportunity cost of where do you put that money, and making it worth it to be able to make the claim too, because it's worth making the claim clearly based on the maths that we've just mentioned here. And then once you have that money, the opportunity cost lays in your hands, and it's your responsibility to make sure, do you put it in an offset account? Do you reinvest it somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very good point, because I didn't mention that. I really just talked about $1 today is not going to be worth the same as in 30 or 40 years, but also $1 in your hand, rather than trying to avoid paying back, let's say 30% of that dollar whenever you sell. If you sell, you can do other things. You can put that capital to use somewhere else.
Yeah. And you made a good point too. It's the hardest time is on the way in. So you should be doing everything you possibly can. And we talk about opportunity cost too, and that's relevant to that time value of money. We all know that it's going to be, inflation. Well, the inflation targets from government is 2 to 3%. So they're essentially robbing from us 2 to 3% a year. But it's maybe I might get shut down. That's my aim, get shut down, because then I feel like I'll be more of a. Oh, love it. No, that's really good information, Mike. So I guess this is another question too. Just riffing it as always. House and land packages we generally don't in those outskirts because they're new. They don't perform as well as the established. What's your view? Because there's a few different buyers agency businesses that are out there, and they look at infill sites within metropolitan areas where they are. Those boutique sort of 50 lot estates where they, I've seen them, and they've got a land component. They've also got the new build component as well, and they've got surrounding established properties. What's your view on those ones?
Well, you can make money any old way, right? I'm not saying that you could never buy an off-the-plan apartment that doesn't give you 10% year-on-year returns. I mean, I'm sure that many people have done that. I've heard all sorts of stories about people selling their off-the-plan apartment before construction has even been completed, right? And many people have made lots of money doing that. I just kind of think it's the same thing with mining towns. If you get in on the bottom and you sell at the top, I might not be able to beat you at that game with some other more reasonable way of investing. But I've also interviewed hundreds of the best of brightest in Australia, and they've sort of said, I'm not clever enough to time it like that, so I don't do it. So if they can't do it, the average punter probably shouldn't. And when I talk about new property, in my head, I'm picturing high-rise apartments as kind of it's the quintessential kind of bad investment for me, because we just see so much data that it just doesn't perform. I mean, if you bought a unit in Brisbane 10 years ago, even with the recent boom, I think you're probably roughly going to be worth the same as you were 10 years ago. But it can be done well. I have seen it done well before. I do know some ethical people that operate in that space, and they employ all sorts of different means to make sure that their client is a beneficiary of their expertise. One is they can secure parcels of land at cheaper than you and I might be able to if we're just on the phone. They might be buying a bulk lot. They're also typically looking at developments that are staged and they're getting in early and they're riding the mechanical momentum. They're also looking at areas that have good fundamentals. They're not just going, where can I get a block under X and build for Y and probably flog it off? They're thinking, well, what's this place going to be like in the next 10, 20, 30 years' time? So my view is that I shouldn't be just blanket sort of saying, new property is bad or off the plan is bad. But where I sort of struggle with it is I think about incentives. Ever since I read the Freakonomics book, it's got me zeroed into human incentives. Now, you might be incentivized to go around to Jaryd's house and steal all of his stuff because you get free stuff and he's often out surfing, so there's a chance he won't even know it was you, right? So there's maybe an incentive for you to do that, but human beings can transcend incentives, right? So I might have an incentive to convince somebody that I can do a better job than I actually can because they'll pay me, and if I don't convince them, they might go somewhere else. But I don't want to run a business that way, and I'm quite comfortable that I'm across that and I'm never going to sell my soul at the crossroads. But with those situations, when people are getting paid by the builder or the developer, the incentive is for the deal to be done. And it's a similar thing with buyer's agents, right? A buyer's agent is not incentivized to get the property as cheap as they can, purely from a contractual sense. They are incentivized to do the deal, right? Because you might have a certain amount up front, but you only get the big chunk of cash when the deal is done. So is that person incentivized to get it 10 grand cheaper than they maybe the real estate agent is saying that they'll get it for? Or not really, right? But does that mean that no one ever does that? I know that's not the case. I spend enough time with yourself and Scott, for example, to know that that's what drives you, right? But the incentive isn't there. So anytime I see an incentive that is kind of skewed from the best outcome for the client, I think it's always worth being skeptical and asking the question of your consultant or your professional to say, aren't you incentivized in this way? And how they answer that might make you comfortable that they're going to look after you or they're not.
Yeah, I love that explanation. In fact, even with buyer's agents, as you move into commercial, you can pay a flat fee, but if it's different, there is the option where they might charge you per percentage of the size of the acquisition. And is actually incentivized for the agent to acquire that property for more than what maybe it's worth as well, which is crazy. And I've heard a really good quote is that if you show me the incentive, I'll show you the result. And if you understand the incentive, like you've mentioned before, then you can start to see okay, the results are going to be worse for the investor if you are going from a percentage split fee based on the size of the property, because their incentive is let's just come on, Mr. Client, just put an extra 100K in. It's nothing, but they get an extra $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 in their pocket. The seller's happy, and then the buyers may not actually get a deal at market price.
Yeah, right? And you can think about just your average real estate transaction where the selling agent, let's say they're getting, I don't know what it is up your way, but let's say they get 1.9% on the sale price. They've got a deal that they know the client is going to accept roughly where they're at, but they get a sense that the purchaser has another probably 10 or 20 grand. Mm-hmm. The issue there is that they're risking a deal falling over to try and maximize the upside. But at 1.9% of the upside, what are they getting for that extra $15,000 that then they negotiate? I can't do the maths in my head, but I would say that it's skewed to the point where it's not worth risking the deal. Now, that doesn't mean that all real estate agents are bad and in it for themselves, but that is where the incentive is pushing people to go. So I think that's always worth a consideration. And you will know people that don't even care. My job is to get the maximum. If the deal falls over, it is what it is. It feeds into my reputation, and that's worth way more than, one particular deal. But then there are also lazy people who go towards where they're getting the best bang for buck for their activities.
You could also re-incentivize them in a different way. So like, I learned this from my dad. He's like, well, you could sell the property for up to like selling a property, right? On the sell side, selling something you lived in. You sell the property for X amount, but based on the comparables, if you achieve X percentage more for the sale price, I'll give you this amount of money or whatever it is. And you can do that on the buy side too. For example, you could say, hey, look, say it's a $2 million transaction and the market is 2 mil, the comparables are 2 mil for that industrial property. If you get it at like 1.85, like this is your incentive, like I'll give you X amount more for, so they're both winning, like the buyer is winning and the agent is winning. So the agent might get an extra 20 grand, but the seller, the buyer gets an extra, 100 grand off, and everybody's winning and happy. So you can do that way. Business is business. I think most people just listen to all of these podcasts and YouTube channels and just say, okay, I'm taking all of this and I'm just going to do what they say, but they don't have independent thinking that you can restructure things in any way, shape, or form.
Great point. I think really every real estate sales contract should have an estimate of what we think it'll go for, and give them 5, 10, 20% of anything over a certain amount.
Exactly.
Like if you think it's worth $1 million and they get 1.5, like wouldn't you give them half of that?
For sure.
I mean, you'd negotiate for, say, 5% as a starting point, but the real estate agent, if they're any good, they'll out-negotiate you and it'll end up at 35 at least,
Right, yeah.
But excellent point. I mean, it's all up for debate. Like all contracts are negotiable to some degree. I mean, you go and hire a car, like you could potentially negotiate on the contract. You'll probably just annoy the person at the counter and the 8 people waiting behind you. But this can be done, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's a bit, when it comes to a larger acquisition, 100K split between 2 people, maybe the agent gets 30K and you get 70K off the price. That's what agent would not be happy with an extra 30K on top of their 15, 20K, whatever it is.
Yeah. Exactly.
I like where you're going with it. I've got a bit of an industry experience around that. I like structuring when I help people find the best real estate agent to sell. I like structuring that performance incentive based on sort of potential sale prices, because every agent turn around like, oh, I'll do the same amount of service, but if you're tinkering between, you can get that $5,000, you can, just through one question, it's best for the client, it's best for them, it's a really good outcome. I like what you're saying too, Joe, about the incentive, because it's been challenging in the buyer's agent space to find that incentive. Like initially we had negotiation performance fees based on how much money we could save people, and then we'd found that human psychology led to a lot of people going, well, I know that you think it's worth $600,000, but I'm not willing to pay any more than $570,000. So there's my target price, go. And then you're sitting there going, well, I can't really make any savings because you're not willing to pay. When we revert back and say, look, there's already an offer at $580, so you're wasting your time. Then they go, oh, all right, I'll go to $590 then. And they chip you every sort of step of the way, which is frustrating. But maybe it's a pretty new space. But I like sort of where your head was going with that, in that it needs to be more aligned. It's just trying to find that right sweet spot. But onboarding people correctly and testing it out. I know Scott and myself are still trying to test that one out.
I was involved in a real estate transaction back in, I think it was 2001 or 2 or thereabouts, that had an incentive involved in it. So it's not a new idea, but I agree, it's not mass adopted in Australia for no other reason than, I guess, like nobody's really driving it. The consumer's not asking for it, and the real estate agent is probably thinking that's just a bit too complicated and I don't want to do it that way.
Don't like maths.
Yeah, I got a question for you, Mike. You've interviewed, like you mentioned, you've interviewed so many awesome individuals, property investors that are just top level. From so many conversations with those guys, what are some maybe 2 or 3 things that like are the best things that you've learned from what they've had to say, or from their knowledge or their experience that you're like, wow, that really stuck with me, and that's something that will shape how you invest and maybe share with others as well about investing in property?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have the answer
On the top of your
straight
head.
to the
Yeah.
top of my head, but I'll give you some insights of things that I learned that have certainly changed the way I think about it.
Would love it.
What I've kind of figured out is that most of the time, the best advice is the most boring. And we gravitate to the fruity, weird stuff. Like you get someone on the podcast and they're like, well, my whole net worth has been done by, splitter blocks in high crime areas. And where people are like, oh, like maybe this is the secret. This is the way to get ahead. But I mean, it really comes down to spending less than you earn, saving that money, putting it into an asset, and being bloody patient.
Yes,
Like it's get rich slow and boring. The other thing I think is it's a game where you need to be decisive. You need to make decisions. You don't sit on your hand. You don't go, oh, I'll buy when X arbitrary thing happens. Like, oh, I'm waiting until interest rates drop, because then you're competing with everybody else who's got that same ridiculous idea. You kind of want to be in the ground floor. I've also observed in the last couple of years the power of sentiment for good and for evil. But we're now in a situation where we have Facebook groups with tens of thousands of members. We have buyers agents that are doing, 50, 100 deals a month. People follow the Facebook gurus. People follow the big agencies, and even smaller buyers agents sometimes will follow certain bigger agencies because they assume they've got some magic. They've got more of a research budget. They've got more of a secret sauce, and it's all kind of playing out at the moment in Melbourne. And really, like, what is the kind of number one thing that we can point to say Melbourne's going to go through the roof? It's not really about the health of the state economy. That's in the toilet. It's not really about the infrastructure pipeline and the jobs creation, because that's really all been dialed down. I mean, they won't even have the Olympics or Com Games or whatever it was. It's just all about it's really cheap compared to the other cities, and it's its turn to go. And that seems to be enough that people start talking about Melbourne, and already we're starting to see a little uptick in our data of people buying into Victoria. So the herd can be a really dangerous thing. Another one, I think, is people that wait for green shoots. Because of the data lag in our country, the moment you've seen green shoots, so you can get this confirmation of like, yes, this market's on the up, you've really sliced into your upside. So if it grows by, let's say, 20% over 12 months, you might only have 7 or 5% left, because the real movement happens before you can actually see it in the data. Those are probably some of the standout things. I don't know, how was that?
I love that. Those 3 things are awesome. Like, they all play into each other as well, right? Like, the strategy towards property is just just do one thing, do it well, and do it forever. It's like, I think that the theory that I have is that because it's hard, people that don't have money or want to make money, they have this perception that it's hard to get. And because it's hard to get, that means the strategy must be really hard to take. Well, it is the hardest. The strategy is easy. It's simple. It makes sense. I shouldn't say it's easy to stick to the strategy. The strategy is simple, though. It's basic. It's boring. The hard part about it is that we have all these stories in our head about there's going to be like challenges and all that sort of stuff along the way, and like, I'm not going to get my results fast enough, and all these things and narratives that we tell ourselves. But if you just stick to the plan for 10 years, 20 years, you're good. Like, doesn't matter whether you're doing those, whether you're buying a couple of 400K properties, 600K properties, or you're buying like a couple of commercials, or like whatever the strategy is. If you're doing like buy and, rent out, like rent 6 rooms in one property, like if you just do it for a long period of time, like the compounding effect of I believe, of not just like income, which is compounding actually comes from like a mathematical term, which is unfortunate, because the compounding effect of like being patient and being in the same space for a long period of time, the compounding effect of like somebody in a career, the compounding effect of somebody playing sports, of whatever it is, the value is insane. And I think a lot of people miss out on that because they want to get it.
Yeah. Well, Einstein described compound interest as the 8th wonder of the world. And he, you might have heard of him. He was famous for knowing stuff about things, and I also you just sort of jogged my mind. You talked about the strategy. I think that's something that typically we're really bad at as investors in Australia, is that the strategy comes after the hotspot, the fun stuff. I equate it to lollies and vegetables, or dessert and vegetables, right?
Like
you can have your ice cream, but you got to eat your veggies first, like Mum and Dad used to say, right? And the veggies are, well, what do I want to achieve? I want to be a certain amount of age with a certain amount of net assets. Without having that answer first, you can't go then and reverse engineer the portfolio, because that kind of keeps you on the straight and narrow, keeps you on the track, rather than going, somebody said like Townsville's the next hotspot, so they go and do that, and then they go, oh, okay, well, that one's really negatively geared. I need like a cash flow to just sort of go again. But they're not necessarily thinking, well, where's the next one? And that helps with things like cash flow, because at the end of the day, it's a game of finance. It's about, okay, well, I've tapped out a structure. Does it make sense to go to another one? Or I've purchased this asset and it's a bit negative. Like, is it going to be enough to get me across the line for the next one? Or do I need to think about a value add? Or should I have bought something with an extra 2% yield? Without that kind of end strategy, you are just, if you'll pardon the expression, urinating into the wind.
I agree.
Can I say that on your show? I didn't say.
Absolutely.
I could have said it worse.
You can say whatever you want, mate.
Yeah, absolutely.
The joys of it all. No, it's strategy first, and then what am I seeing? I'm seeing more volatile markets as a result of the back of short-term data and people piling in on that. That creates more risk in certain markets, but also higher risk, higher returns as well. Probably can be a bit more medium-term traded if you're willing to do that. But Jaryd and I talk about it a lot. It's like, zoom out, and what is the bigger picture? Do you want to be a property trader and really do you love it? Do you want to be involved in it? Probably, if that's the case, then come work in the space, and help others. But most people, they're not waking up thinking about property. They're thinking about, their holidays or their family or their health.
Thinking about the desserts, aren't they, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they go.
And I love the zoom out thing as well. I mean, I really love aviation because, when you're up in the sky, you kind of, you fly over your house and you go, everything that I was worried about sits in this tiny little speck of Earth, in this big globe, in this pale blue dot in an infinite universe, right? It gives you a sense of perspective. And I think if you look at, say, the property market over time, as a little worm sort of humming along, there's some major events there that if you zoom out far enough, they don't even make a blip. Like, you will see things like World War II, COVID, these are big ones that you will kind of see it in the data. But certain things, like legislative changes or a change of government, you can easily get sucked into 1 or 2 months of core logic data prints. You can get sucked into the media. As an example, in the December quarter, I think we saw for the first time in a while a negative print, and the media's like, housing boom over, or the beginning of the housing crash. And then, January, it's kind of flat, and it's sort of like, there's not really a story in that. We'll leave that one alone. It is really about the stories, and I've had enough to do with journalists, and there are some good ones, but many come to me asking for a comment with a story that's already written. In my head, I would be going to the experts to say, what are you seeing? And then the story would be informed by the expertise. But there's always this, okay, I've got a story that basically needs to say property is going to tank. So what have you got to say that I can plug into that? And, I might say that actually on the long term, it's very positive, and they might infer that, Mortlock says only long term will property be positive. It's funny how that world works.
True. Interesting. But that's the world we live in, right? I think people are getting more and more, well, I don't know, maybe in our circles, people are getting a bit more attuned to those hidden messages that marketing businesses get paid billions of dollars a year to convince us. But
I'd like to think so, but I don't know.
That's where the herd mentality comes to, and it snowballs. Where you might not be watching the channel XYZ anymore, 7, 9, whatever. But then those conversations start to compound over time, and then how many strategy sessions or people I've spoken to that have an opinion on the property market. Based on just, in all due respects, very little research or information. It's just something they've heard that they made sense to them. We're lacking a little bit of critical thinking and doing the hard work. I find no one really wants to actually get in the weeds with it. They're just kind of piggybacking off certain.
It is weird, isn't it? I don't have any opinion on, say, equestrian or animal husbandry or tulips, because I don't know anything, right? And if we really quiz the average Australian about what they know about real estate, it's probably very similar to my equestrian knowledge. However, they live in a house. The media constantly talks about houses. They go to barbecue where people talk about, I bought this, I did that, or did you see that house down the street? So we do get all of this information, and we do get an opportunity to think or to cogitate on it. And that leads us to the belief and that we have certain biases, and then we look for things that confirm those biases. And it is a little bit of a mess. But chances are, if you hear two people talking about property, they're not people that actually really know anything about it.
I agree. And so that's the dangerous side. And then even when you've got people that are been in property for 10, 20 years that are experts and they just monitor data, they are like, well, this could happen, but I'm not 100% sure because anything could change. They're not, their opinion is funny that their opinion is not as strong as some people that have, and they got more information and more experience than somebody that's got little information and little experience. It's interesting how it
goes. What's that principle? It's like,
It's the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Dunning-Kruger, that's the one. Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
If you don't know it, look it up. Or Mike, do you want to explain just quickly the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Well, it's like a cognitive bias that with a little bit of information, we overstate how much we know about a particular subject. So, if there's something that literally you didn't even know existed until I brought it up to you in this podcast, then you might...
Like animal husbandry?
Yeah. You wouldn't really have an opinion on it. But if you spent, half an hour having a beer with a farmer and he shared his views, you might overinflate your knowledge of that subject matter because you've got, a sample size of one bloke at a pub.
Yeah, I love that.
I don't think that's the Webster's definition, but it's close enough.
No, it makes total sense. Absolutely.
Then it goes into you know a little bit, and you think you know a lot, and then you learn a little bit more. Then you come to, I guess, that expert level where you have that a level where you're look, I know a lot, but I also know that you can never know it all, and therefore it's a little bit more humbling. But yeah, the marketing people aren't like that. And then also now with social media, and the algorithm that actually learns what you're actually viewing, it's definitely amplifying that. I guess the risk there.
It can keep you in that world, right? It can keep you in the FOMO world of this area I've missed out on, and I've got to get to the next area, and this location, and it's the same with and we could go way deeper into algorithms and stuff, but let's stop it there, Mike. I just want to say thanks so much for coming on. It was refreshing to chat about tax depreciation and know that it's still worth doing, and also everything else that you've learned through property. So thanks so much for coming on.
Pleasure.
Guys, check out episode 31 with Mike again, and Yeah, Mike, where can we send people? What's your site again?
Yeah, so it's mcgqs.com.au. So MCG like the cricket ground, and then Quantity Surveyors. And I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, all the other ones that haven't been banned.
Oh, love it. Well, you enjoy getting high on the planes, flying around, looking at all the land, mate.
Just to be clear, I'm not getting high on the planes, but I am high in the plane.
Oh yeah, sorry.
That just sounds like I did drugs before I got on. There's no drugs.
That was me. I'm trying to look for that one snippet that I can put on socials.
Good. That's the stitch up. Excellent. Yeah. Thanks, mate.
Thanks again. As always, thanks very much, and definitely you're doing a lot, especially with Pippa and fighting the good fight. So thanks as always, and
appreciate
we're looking forward to get you on sometime in the future as well.
Yeah, anytime. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.